Hey watch friends, today we're going to be checking out this piece from the newer micro brand. This is the Wicked Watch Pearl Diver. While the model itself was debuted about a year ago on Kickstarter and was of course fully funded, it actually just recently started shipping and is out in the wild. This variant we're looking at today though, as we'll see, is a natural meteorite dial, and that is, I believe, a first for the brand, and this is a first look thereof. That being said, I do want to mention, before we get into this, I'll highlight a little bit of the packaging, but I do highly encourage you go back and look. I recently had an unboxing video, goes into detail. We look at the case. It comes with some tools. These tools are really neat here. So as you can see, you get the Wicked Watch branding on that. This screws open, has some spring bar tools. Here is another Wicked Watch branded item, and this has a little container for your spring bars. Just some really cool pieces, but additionally though, you get 3 straps with that. You get the nice watch, microfiber cloth, all kinds of good stuff. Very impressive presentation. Can't encourage you enough to go back and watch that unboxing. Worth a look. That being said, today I wanted to mainly focus on the watch itself, what it's like to actually live with, some of the quirks, the items that we want to cover here. So first, for the basic specs, this does come with a 3-year warranty for it. So you come with an excellent warranty. So despite the fact that it's a newer micro brand using reliable components, so I don't suspect you'll have issues. That being said, you have good backing behind that. The case, measured from roughly the 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock position, is coming in at 39.6 millimeters. The bezel does kick out slightly, as we can see there, just has a little bit of an overhang. That's coming in at a flat 40 millimeters. So that's where they get the overall stated spec for that. The lugs are going to be a little wider than often on a 40 millimeter. These are coming in at 22 millimeters. The lug to lug is a nice wrist versatile 45.8 millimeters. So smaller wrists won't have any problems there, and larger wrists, I think you'll still find plenty of presence. The overall thickness, while we're at that side angle, not including the straps of course, this is coming in at 14.2 millimeters, and that is with this crystal. And you can see the crystal just sits ever so slightly proud of that that bezel. I did have to double check that when I was measuring through there. So it looks like the bezel's a little bit higher, but it's actually not. So 14.2, not too bad. Definitely not the slimmest in the world. And I believe there's another version. There's a Swiss version. I believe that's a little bit skinnier if I'm not mistaken for that. But overall, I haven't found it to be too bad to the styling. And we'll see this on wrist here shortly. As far as the crystal, you know, I mentioned in the unboxing that it had the distortion like a single dome. However, if you look, you can see it clearly is a double dome style crystal. You can see that nice little hump there sitting in between the bezel. However, if you look at that from an angle, check out that distortion that gets. Really that single dome kind of effect, really neat, and we'll talk about that more and look at that more as we go throughout. But I like that aspect. This is a sapphire crystal, and it does have 5 inner layers of blue AR, just a very slight blue tint to that you can see in some lighting. As far as the movement, on this particular one, as you can see, it's the no date variant. It has the Seiko NH38. There is additionally, though, a date version, which I believe is at the 3 o'clock position. That's an NH35. Additionally, there are variants with a Swiss movement, specifically the STP-1-11, that is available as well. So you do have some choices there. Personally, I'm a fan of the Japanese movements in these, and I think they're nice workhorse movements, so good choices. The water resistance, while you won't see it printed anywhere on the dial or on the case back, it is tested at 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance. As far as the weight, I went ahead and I wanted to get different specs for you because I figured many of you are going to change these out, and you've got the drilled lugs on the sides to make it easy to do so. The head only is coming in at 88.9 grams. On this NATO, it is coming in at 111.9 grams. So that kicks it up a little bit there. The leather, surprisingly, and here's a look at that leather strap, this comes in actually less than that at 102.2 grams. And then the rubber, as you'd probably expect, especially for being a relatively thick slab rubber strap with having bronze hardware and everything on that, this is coming in at the heaviest. It is 124 grams, and of course those are with the straps installed. Now that we have a better feel for these specs, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into the watch itself, get a feel for some of the colors. You know, this one, they really have an abundance of color options that are available. Obviously, the meteorite that we're looking at today, but additionally, they have variations of forged carbon. There's what they refer to as the gold forged carbon, which has gold flakes throughout there. There's another one that's a blackout, more traditional of a forged carbon look. Then there's mother of pearl, but I can't get into all the variants because there's just too many, but there's a lot of choices available. One of the things that you'll notice as going to be a common theme throughout, they went with a nearly sterile dial with each of these. As you can see on the one that we're looking at today, all they really have on the dial, beyond obviously the markers and the hands that of course placed on top of the dial, is just that logo at the 12 o'clock position. So it gives a nice, very clean aesthetic to that overall that's going to appeal to many. As far as the dial focus, they pick some really cool dials, and with going with that sterile accent, I think it allows you to really keep your eye on the actual materials that are being used, and they do use some neat materials, especially for a debut offering. As far as the hardware, the handset, you're going to notice it is a brushed handset. I'd call them like a sword style, but with cathedral type marking on those, and that's of course most obvious on the both hour and minute hand there. The second hand just has a very traditional tip to it, but if you do look at the counterbalance point, it has an anchor style for that, which I think is a neat touch. The markers, as you go throughout, are going to be an hourglass at the 12 o'clock, then round, and then mixed in with oval for applied markers all the way around there. They do look like printing, but I believe they are applied because these are actually LumaCast, and that's one of the big claims to fame for this watch. And let's go ahead and actually shift over to the lume. I've got to say, this thing, it gets a lot of talk, but the lume on this is absolutely a beast. I went through and was just watching through testing. I've never seen where the camera didn't adjust. It always is more impressive in person than it is on camera, but watching going through my duration here, it really wasn't pretty much fading at all. So that was extremely impressive there. But additionally, they applied lume everywhere. You've got on the markers, the handset, the bezel. You actually have it on the crown. You also have it on the buckle. You even have it on the pouch that it comes with, as well as the tools. So they put lume on pretty much every surface that it could possibly be put onto. Very impressive there. And as I mentioned, this is LumaCast, which is actually from the same company, from the same manufacturer rather, that I believe Tudor uses. So you're really going with high regard there, and they do use the highest grades of lume available, and I think it shows in the results. Shifting back to the watch itself, the bezel action. So first, as you can see, and as you'd expect from this style, this is going to be a unidirectional bezel, and it's 120 clicks. But let's go ahead and listen to that action. Such a nice, satisfying tactile click to this. It isn't the most firm that I've ever felt out there, and it's actually, I would say, extremely well dialed in. It has enough resistance that it doesn't want to go on its own, but at the same time, it really gives you that nice feedback. So it's not too soft, not too firm. I think it's pretty much dialed in perfectly. One of the best bezel actions I've felt. But one of the things that I really like with this bezel, check out that bezel insert. This has a domed, so you can see that curve, which goes perfectly with that dome crystal sandwiched in the middle. That gives just an extremely unique look with that bronze bezel insert there. So not only is that going to patina up nicely, which I like, but just look at that aesthetic. I think it's such a cool look. One of my favorite attributes of this entire watch, and that was before I felt the action on it, which just made it even better. As far as the milling is nicely done. It's kind of like a modified coin edge, like a wide coin edge, but you can see it stops short, and I think that gives an attractive pattern in something different. But the grip, though, it's fantastic. I can't talk enough about this bezel and just how much I like the overall quality of that as far as the tactile click, the feel, the utilization. I'm not one who uses a bezel a lot, but I will say I would definitely fidget with this one like crazy, as I have here over the last week or so of getting to know it. So overall, the bezel, fantastic there. Shifting over to the case, you can see at first impression this looks kind of like a slab style case, and you can see it does have a relatively flat profile, but on closer inspection you can see it does have nice subtle curvature to that, which I think adds intrigue and allure, and I think additionally that goes very well with the curve on the bezel as well as the curve on the crystal. So I think that was a great choice there, and I like the lines of this case profile. The lugs do downturn slightly. They do sit tall of the case back, which is something that I personally, you've probably heard me say it before, I always prefer for the lugs to be in alignment with the case back, so that way I think it's size versatile, but it also keeps from that floating effect. I haven't noticed it being bad on this one, but I would like those to be kicked down a little bit further. The finish, it's hard to tell with the bronze because this is already taking a little bit of a patina here with the humid weather that we've had lately, but it does have vertical brushing across the surfaces. As we've already looked at, has drilled lugs on the exterior, so that way you're going to get nice, easy strap change friendliness. There's the lug profile, a little bit wider since the 22 millimeters than many would be, as typically having 20 on a 40 millimeter watch. Shifting over to the crown side, you can see it does have integrated crown guard there. As for the crown itself, this is a screw down construction. It's measuring in at 6.9 millimeters. It does have a milling that you can see, I think pretty well matches with the bezel. I think that's nicely chosen for that, and I think it integrates well for a good look overall. As you've probably already seen, this is signed on the exterior, and as we already looked at in the lume footage, this is also lumed there. So just like with everything else on the watch, if they could get lume on it, they put it on there. As far as the case back is a screw-in construction. It is going to be a circular or radial brushing for the finishing on that. It is stainless steel as you'd expect, though I believe the Swiss version uses titanium for the backing, but that just might be some special versions. It has a drag-in pattern that's inlaid in the middle. Do note though, there is text on here that says NH35. I did double check on that because this felt like an NH38 to me, and I knew they had the movement available. That's just a limitation. They were only able on the initial run to do one case back, and that was an extra or a stretch goal with having the NH38 choice. So unfortunately that didn't make it onto the first batch of cases, but do not be mistaken, this is an NH38 movement. As far as the straps, as we've already kind of looked at here in presentation, and this is on my 6.5-inch wrist, the NATO I think hugs nicely to the wrist overall for a NATO. It has bronze hardware, and that's one of the things that is in keeping across all of these straps, and it's hard to believe that they include as many straps as they do. Shifting over to the rubber, you can see the rubber is very nicely fitted to the watch overall. It is just more of a slab type construction. It does have a relatively thick profile to that, but it does have fitted ends for it, and it already is pre-curved as well, so it takes curve to the wrist nicely despite the thickness. On the interior, if you saw in the unboxing video, it does have an inner pattern to that for sweat reduction as well. And then on the, my personal choice actually for this isn't one that it comes with. I really like this on a Nick Manke strap. I actually wore this the most on a very similar color scheme for the Nick Manke, but I like the elastic strap and I like the overall color scheme they were going for. So that was the way that I went with that. As we've already talked about, they all are going to be signed, as well as they do have lume applied to the clasp, or to the buckles rather, as well. So nice choices there. All right, so now that we have a better feel for the watch and the overall characteristics, let's go ahead and look at some comps. The closest comps that I had here, this is a Zelos Mako, and you can see, of course, a bronze variant there, also 40 millimeters, so this gives you an idea. I think they're sized pretty similarly, though they have a very different feel and look to them overall. But this just gives you an idea as far as the sizing. Another bronze variant here, this one is kicking it up a little larger in size. This is the Revolot Hex Mariner, but here it gives you just another idea as far as the overall. I think dial presence actually is a little possibly larger on this despite the larger size of the Hex Mariner, but you have a much wider bezel, much wider bezel layout there on this one. All right, so now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my view of some of the positives, some of the critiques, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives, I already talked a lot about it, but that lume. I mean, I have it in my notes here with lume exclamation points, so I'm probably not coming across with adequate enthusiasm for it, but the lume, I mean, it's extremely impressive. I've heard a lot of reviews about the early Pearl Diver production variants that were out there, and they didn't deceive. It truly, I mean, it is on another level of lume, very impressive. I've liked that a lot. The dome bezel, I talked about that a lot as well. I think the dome bezel is just a really cool accent and touch. It's something that really, I think, makes it stand out in most collections out there. I know certainly it does in mine. I think it has a very unique sort of vintage style aesthetic to that, but with modern touches and amenities throughout. We already talked about the crystal distortion, just such a cool effect. I love that. Talked about it every single dome crystal that I've ever had, and this one has that same kind of effect. I just think it's a fun, playful kind of aspect. You get plenty of legibility head on, but as you go to extreme angles, you start to get that cool distortion. The sizing, I think, is very versatile. I think this is going to work for pretty much every wrist. As we already talked about, the 40 millimeter spec, I think, is pretty much a sweet spot for many people. But additionally, the overall thickness, I think it's pretty well dialed in for a dive watch. Would I mind a little slimmer? Certainly not. But that being said, I think it's about good as it is. And then, as I talked about at the intro, the kit for this is insane. The pouch, all the extras, the straps, the tools. I mean, across the board, they couldn't have had more attention to detail for what this comes, even down to the warranty card and that cool effect. If you see the unboxing video, you'll know what I'm talking about there, where that slides out. It's just such a cool little touch. Like that a lot. But that's not to say that this isn't without some critiques. As far as the negatives, this is one true negative here, and this is the crown. I do want to mention up front, as I said at the outset, this is an early production sample. Accordingly, unfortunately, it has the original crown stem, which was actually geared towards the NH35. Unfortunately, when they implemented on this NH38 variant, the crown stem is just a little bit too short, so it can make it hard, not every time, but when you hack this, and it of course does have hacking, when you stop that second hand and go to push it back in, sometimes the second hand doesn't engage, so you have to push a few times to get that started. It's an annoyance more than anything else, but that is definitely a legitimate critique. That has already been corrected, though. They have the longer part. They are swapping those out. So if you have one and you have issues with it, do give them a shout. They'll get that taken care of for you. The straps, I mentioned with the rubber strap, The pattern that this has on the interior, I talked about in the unboxing, just up against wrist. To me, it feels a little bit sharp. It's a little bit uncomfortable. I found it kind of digs into my wrist and actually leaves that hot spot pattern for that. I don't really like that. You know, this I understand as far as for the sweat and those kind of things. I think this could have been a little less aggressive for that, even if it was just a rectangle cutout just to give airflow through that. I'm not a huge fan of that, though overall I do like the strap. I'm not a big fan usually of the slab, but I think it integrates well, and I like the fact that it's fitted, and of course it's an extra, so that's a little thing there. The NATO, do want to mention with this one, this does not have a floating second keeper or sliding second keeper. So as you are on larger wrist, you're going to find the tail comes a little bit short. For me, it's fine. I get a little bit of a nub, as we saw, and I can tuck that back under. But for larger wrist folks, you might find that it comes up a little short, and you can't, unfortunately, adjust that. So again, a minor thing. As far as just some personal preference items, I would have preferred on the dial, I always like, whenever possible, having hashes so you can tell the specific second or minute at a glance, as well as get precise setting going without being at 5 intervals. So that's something I think it would have benefited from, like a printed chapter ring, you know, even if subtly done there, just to give you some kind of reference point. So that would have been nice. And then same thing is true with the hand. For me, I would have liked to have seen the minute hand as well as the second hand kicked out just a smidge. They're pretty close to the edge as is, but I really do think they could have been kicked out a little further, and especially with those hashes, I think that would have been a perfect integration. But again, very minor items, and those are just my personal feedback pieces. All right, so where does that leave us for overall summary? I've got to say, you know, I've already alluded to this, but this to me, it's a great hybrid of vintage styling, but with modern touches and execution, as well as the fit and finish, and I think the fit and finish is solid. For the price, which I didn't really talk about pricing because there's so many ranges for this, I'd say really you're looking at around $350, $400 for starting price, depending on what variation you're looking at. And they go up from there, especially if you get into the Swiss and the Meteorite and some different pieces. So they can get into like the $500, $600 territory for those. But I think overall, I think you get a pretty solid value, especially when you factor in all of the extras that it comes with. So at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty solid total offering, and especially for being a debut offering with the crazy loom it has and the different touches that they did. So it's one, especially with the cleanup of the crown, it's one that I wouldn't hesitate to recommend or to consider if you like this overall style. So I hope this video has been helpful for you if you've been on the fence about this one. If you did like it, please do hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, please do smash that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.